So we're reading MATOT-MASEI, and the message that I have for you today is entitled, Fight for Your Future. In our weekly passage, Matot, we just read about Israelites going to all-out war. And they're going to war with Midianites. And in Numbers 31, we also read that Moses is told that he must exact vengeance. This is not just a war, this is a war of retribution. This is a war of vengeance. And so that's what Moses has to do, a war of vengeance. And after that business is over, he will be released. Which basically for Moshe, that means that the tribes of Israel are marching into the land and he goes to die. This is his final assignment. And that's what he gets stuck with, a war. Ancient rabbis said that this act was placed upon the shoulders of Moshe just before it was time for him to die, perhaps because he was not the one to stand up for the people at the time of this rebellion of Israelites. It was Pinchas, the one who stopped the plague, not Moshe. So the rabbis say that's why he gets to now one more task to do before he dies. And so the Israelite warriors assembled, as we read in the Parsha, and they assailed the enemy and they killed all men of Midian. It says, well, maybe it's an exaggeration. I'm sure a few people were hiding out there somewhere. But they killed all the men, and then they also killed 5 kings whose names we just chanted from the Torah. So thank you so much. They also killed Bilam, the seer. And you remember the prophecies that Bilam has proclaimed of Israel. We begin with the words that Bilam, the son of Peor, actually said. We begin our services with those words. Ma tzovu ochalecha Yaakov. That's where that comes from his sayings just a couple of parshas away. And then they also brought the women and all the goods that they have been able to capture. And Moshe told them that they have to kill the women too, and the children. And the only people spared are the little girls. So you read this passage and you probably think to yourself, so much death, so much carnage, such brutality. People who read this not fully understanding what is going on here can get really easily turned off by these verses in the Torah. It's pretty brutal. It's hard to take in. And if this story makes you feel uncomfortable, there's a good reason why. Because you have probably been taught to be kind, to forgive, to love people, to give people grace, the benefit of the doubt, turn the other cheek, all those things. And you know what? Those things are good. You were taught right, but not in this situation. This was a different matter. This was a matter of life and death for Israelites. 24,000 men of Israel fell because of this treachery of Midianites. And this was a war of vengeance. People had to be killed. People had to be put to death. And this was a fight for Israel's future. How is it a fight for Israel's future? Well, I'll tell you in a minute. But let's for a moment think, as you read these verses, how can this possibly apply to us today? Do we have any Midianites in our lives? Is the question I'm going to ask you. From time to time, we all have conflicts. We all have problems. We have tsuras of all kinds. We argue, we fight, we get into or sell all sorts of disputes with people, and most of the time we settle these situations peacefully. Most of the time, shalom, understanding, some sort of a compromise can come and we can work things out and everything blows over. But then there are situations sometimes that we encounter in life where people with whom we're dealing are just plain toxic to us. We cannot withstand them. It's not possible for us to withstand them, and we shouldn't. For some reason, we try to smooth things over, and they turn it back to us and dish out more pain and more suffering and more tsuras. I don't know, maybe you have somebody like that again and again and again. Maybe you experienced this, maybe not. If you haven't experienced, may Hashem bless you, and may you never experience this in your life. But if you have, then you know what I'm talking about. Now I'm going to say, be careful. Do not just label anyone your Midianite and go to holy war against them. Okay? Let's not misapply these verses. That's not what Hashem is trying to teach us. Just because somebody is fighting with you, and just because they're bringing out the worst in you, that doesn't mean that they're Midianite, they're your Midianite, and they deserve to be wiped out from the face of the earth, as we read in this parsha. Maybe you're kind of part of the problem and making this fight worse. Maybe you're part of this situation. So don't just quickly say, all right, these people deserve to be wiped out. It's not like that. Sometimes we're the ones who stir up strife just as much as the other party. What is important for us to understand is what Midianites did. They led Israel astray away from Hashem. And if there is somebody in your life that has that effect on you, if there's somebody in your life that is doing this to you, this will probably happen again and again and again. And that's why you have to fight for your future, just like Israel did. Israelites, they looked to Moshe for wisdom, by the way. They didn't just launch into this holy war by themselves. Remember, it was Moshe who told them, no, you must kill the women too, because guess what? It was those women who actually brought Israel to this sin. And so, yes, it's a brutal story, terrible situation, but we have to understand this was a fight for the future of Israel. This war of vengeance, Israelites fought before they crossed over to Canaan, which became later the land of Israel. They did this before so they wouldn't have to fight this war later. Because Moshe, in his wisdom, knew very well that if those people stayed, they will once again bring Israel into sin. And they will draw and drag Israel into idolatry. So that's why the command was given to have this war of vengeance. So to say all that, if you ever find yourself entangled with people who stand to bring you down spiritually, they cause you to sin again and again, if they lead you away from Hashem, perhaps you should follow the advice that Yeshua gave us, a very cogent, simple advice. He said, if your hand or foot causes you to sin, cut it off. Now, he didn't literally mean this. You understand. What we're supposed to do is we're supposed to end this kind of relationship. We're supposed to dissolve it. Yes, it's harsh, it's brutal, but that's what we must do. It's an extreme measure. If you know that Hashem promised you a bright future, as he promised to Israel, even through the words of Bilam, then you have to take extreme measures to protect that future and fight for the future. Hashem said that he will bless those who love him and obey his commandments. And there are people who are dragging you away from Hashem. You have to resist them. You have to fight the war. You have to fight for your future. Do not allow them to rob you of the blessings that Hashem has for you in your life.